Representative from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a West African tradition that whenever you address a group of people that you ask an elder for permission to speak. And today I rise with the permission of Venus Williams, who lives in the 17th Assembly District. We're talking a lot about civics today. And I think it's really important to have civics conversations. And when we talk about civics, I hope we're not just trying to be cheerleaders for the United States and the founding fathers, and to talk about how great they were and not address many of the mistakes that they made or some of the missteps that they took, some of them being intentional. I think that we need to talk about the civil rights era. That's a part of our civics engagement. We need to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement. That's a part of our civics engagement. We also need to talk about the LGBTQ plus movements with heroes like Harvey Milk. We need to talk about that in our civics engagement as well. I wasn't going to say anything today. I think that many of the things that I was going to speak on, I was in committee. We had robust conversations. I think some of the things that I want to affiliate myself with everything that has been stated by the representative from the 12th today. And we had some great conversations. She gave us a civic lesson in committee and also one here today as well. However, I knew that my colleagues couldn't resist. And as we talk about civics, I want to talk about one of the greatest orators, theologians, Americans, and true patriots, as we talk about the spirit of patriotism, which is challenging the system on behalf of the hearts and minds of the people. I knew that he would be evoked, and I'm talking about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm curious where the disingenuity of the invoking of Dr. King comes from. I'm sure that if those who would inject his name into these dialogues, I would ask them to accept my challenge to read some of the books that he wrote. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? If we talk about the book that he wrote, where he was on an island by himself on vacation, if you will, and writing for himself, I would want them to read some of his writings that he gave from the Birmingham jail, etc. Read some of the things that he wrote and understand that Dr. King's disapproval rating was 75% when he was assassinated. However, we would suspect that those here today would have grossly supported his ideology, including his leadership in the Poor People's Campaign, his opposition to the conflict in Vietnam, and his arrival to Washington, D.C., where he said, "We're coming to get our check," talking about the economic inequities in the United States. This is a part of civics history. And as the young people would say in the communities today, it's the hypocrisy for me. We have to make sure that if we're going to be invoking and asking people to think about civic leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that we tell all the history, that we tell the complete story, that we know and understand what people like Dr. King stood for, and that we don't cherry pick and try to pull his name out lazily and conveniently as possible. That when we talk about folks like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and we talk about civics lessons, that we aren't also cherry picking there as well. We're going to pull out the good stuff and we're going to spit out the things that are tough to talk about so that some of our students won't feel uncomfortable and we can move forward and just use these small parts of the history and not tell the whole history. Let's tell all of it. Let's tell all of it, and let's let our relatively intelligent young people in our schools decipher what it is that they need to decipher and give them the intelligence to pick out what is good for them and what may be bad for them. And also, if they choose to get engaged, they choose to go on a march, if they choose to organize their pupils if their fellow pupils, if they choose to talk about an issue that maybe we as adults are too uncomfortable to talk about, let them know that that discourse is also civics as well. And it's a live civics lesson. And as the representative from the 12th was speaking, I'm reminded that some of the best teachers, they taught on the fly. You know, there was something happening in the classroom and they had read all these books and gotten all this information, and they were able just to give their own civics lesson on the fly that was perfectly relatable to what was happening in that classroom. So let's have that conversation. Let's teach the history. And if we're going to invoke the names of ancestors, let's make sure we're doing it in a way that isn't disingenuous and doesn't reek of hypocrisy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.